The Japanese Yomi and Buddhist overlays. If China's Niyu looks like a municipal archive of sin, 10 kings, ledgers, and a very thorough complaint desk, Japan's native Yomi begins in silence. A slope, a locked mouth, and a myth that treats death as pollution before it treats it as verdicts. Buddhism later crafts a courtroom onto that silence, but the native tone remains uncanny, intimate, and anti-bureaucratic. Gates and thresholds. Yomotsu Hirasaka, the slope of no return. In Japanese myth, the threshold is a slope, Yomotsu Hirasaka, the plane, enough to walk on place where a living person can step, and in a single instant be elsewhere. The image is quietly upsetting because it is so humble. A dirt track, a country lane, a worn stitch in a land where the sacred and the everyday touch. The canonical scene, as the Kojiki tells it, gives you everything you need to know about the tone of this underworld. You see, Izanagi, bereft and furious at the loss of Izanami, refuses the finality of death. He follows her into Yomi, into the place of the dead, to fetch her back. He finds her in a house of gloom. She begs for a little delay to make offerings to the gods. He waits. Yet, curiosity wins. He breaks her calm and, with its tooth struck and turned to a small flame, he lights the way. The light reveals not a beloved queen in bridal glory, but the raw fact of decay. Flesh crawling with maggots, thunder spirits born from the tornness of her body. Izanagi flees in horror. When Izanami pursues him, he heaves a great stone across the slope, seals it, and turns the passage into a remembered wound in the landscape. The story offers no trial, no ledger, no promise, only a sealed mouth and a truth that the living must learn to live with. That final ceiling, a boulder or scar in the grounds, is itself part of the myth's genius. The slope is not a theatrical gateway dressed in iron and belts. It becomes a place whose plainness is its authority. Local shrines and place names in the Izumo region keep that authority alive. A stone, a hollow lane, an unassuming shrine where people point and say, quietly, that there the slope was shut. More important than the topology is the meaning we carry across it. In the native register, the crossing is principally about contamination, kegare, not judgment. Death brings with it an offensive presence that clings to those who touch it. Blood, rot, rupture. The ritual answer is not invective, but water. Izanagi's first act on emerging is to wash. Misogi, the full body purification, the cleansing that returns him to the living world by unmaking the stain. That ritual act is not incidental, it is essential to what Yomi explains. You see, Yomotsu Hirasaka teaches that death is less a verdict and a kind of pollution, and every culture's polite literature of the body, its ablutions, its rites, its careful shame-tinged etiquette, exists to contain that shame. The calm as a torch is the story's petal of horror and, oddly, its most human detail. A calm is an object of care, ordinary and intimate. He strikes it, and suddenly his intimacy as the instrument of revelation. The maggots are simultaneously literal and symbolic. Literal in myth, symbolic in meaning. They are the visible proof that life has been transformed into something that repels the living and that must be managed by ritual. What follows, that exposure, is not a courtroom, but a psychology. Izanagi's flight, the sealing of the slope, the abandonment of the attempt to retrieve the dead. These are not failures of will, so much as a lesson in limits. The myth preserves a cultural truth about boundaries. Where other underworlds dramatize transaction, the coin for Charon, the ledger read by Rashnu, the kings checking off names in a pompous court, Yomi's emphasis is on limits and on the social technologies we develop to live with limits. Hence misogi, hence taboo, hence the careful choreography of mourning. The story is not bleak so much as austere. It insists on a kind of civility before the absolute. And yet, the story is not static. When Buddhism arises, it brings a vocabulary of karma, judgment, and hell realms. And those ideas graft onto the slope like a lettering on a tree. The empty silence of Yomi is given a bureaucratic voice. Enma appears in temple murals, wearing red, holding a ledger. The Jikoku, the hells, are mapped and named. The dead can be imagined as traveling through degrees of punishment or mercy. Popular practice stitches the two frames together. On one hand, you have the old insistence that death pollute and must be washed away. On the other, you have a newly eloquent doctrine of consequence that promises rescue for some and retribution for others. Into this layered imagination walk the small human interventions. The rows of stone, Jizō, whips tied by mothers who have lost their children, the lanterns set afloat at Obon, the periodic chanting in temple halls that hopes to tip a fate toward relief. These are not contradictions so much as cultural doing what cultures do, taking a myth that explains a deep structural fact and adding instruments of solace and practical hope. The slope teaches that some things cannot be bargained with. The world's answer is a small, repeated human action. Wash, remember, and live with the knowledge that some crossings mark us forever. Transit and Psychopomps, guides absent, shadows plentiful, later escorted by Enma's courts. Where China's Niyu looks like a municipal archive, clerks, ledgers, and bailiffs at every gate. Japan's native image begins with an absence so eloquent it becomes a kind of presence. Silence on a slope, a shadow sliding down, and no one in a red robe to read your file. And that absence is the native Shintō truth about transits. The dead rift, Yomi is a place of stain, and psychopompic ceremony is at first sparse rather than statuary. A body eased from a futon, brief living like a faint bell. In the oldest stories, there is no herald who announces the soul's departure, no call to his messenger to take a hand. Izanagi's ascent is instructive precisely because he goes alone. When he lights his comm and peeks into the house of the dead, he meets rot and thunder rather than order. The ancestral template here is not a processional but a slight, a solitary motion from household too dark. If you want drama, it is the drama of abandonment. The threshold is crossed in a private way, and that crossing leaves a mark on the living in the form of gegare, ritual pollution that must be washed away. This native stillness does not mean people felt alone about that. No. Communities responded with ritual, but the rituals are hygiene and remediation rather than litigation. Misogi and harae, purifications with water and prayer, are the immediate remedies, where other cultures hand you a judge, Japan hands you a basin, and a fastidious sense that the world must be made clean again. Transit in the oldest register is more a problem of cultivation than a problem of blame. Then Buddhism arises and fills the silence with a vocabulary of karma, name lists, and courtrooms. On the continent come images of Enma, the stern, sometimes comic, sometimes terrifying judge, and the mapped Jigoku, the hells. Suddenly, Yomi can be read as a place of consequence as well as contamination. Registers are kept, deeds await, and imaginative bands of educators appear in temple paintings, woodcuts, and popular story. The solitary shadow on the slope acquires an administration. The drift has a desk to report to. So, you end up with two overlapping economies of meaning. On one plane is the older Shintō vision, in which spirits wander and the living must cleanse. On the other is the Buddhist overlay that makes the afterlife legible as cause and effect. Practically, that means Japanese practice becomes charmingly plural. A family might perform ritual purification at home and commission monks to chant for merit, and then console themselves at a roadside stone, Jizō, with a tight bib. Each channel answers a different anxiety, contamination, karmic consequence, and the worry for the vulnerable, children, miscarried infants who need particular succor. Imagery is where the contrast plays out beautifully for the eye and the ear. So, picture first a shadow sliding down the slope, no footsteps that belong to another, just the hush of leaves and a small drapery of dust. That silence is telling. It says that this was never primarily a public process, then are cut forward in time or culture to a temple mural. Enma sits in a painted court, a bronze register glinting at his side, attendants in queue, a robe of names unspooling like a municipal roll call. The mural's colors and the slopes harsh, and contradictory, so much as conversational. One voice whispers, "Wash." The other reads the file aloud. And stand before a row of Jizō statues, small, weather-soft figures with bibs and little toys left like tiny propitiations. These are the human heart of the overlay. Jizō is not a judge. He is a guardian, a compassionate presence who tells the smallest and most vulnerable among the dead. Mothers and grandmothers tie bibs and leave tiny plastic toys because it is an action they can take. Practical, modest, and merciful, in a religion where the bureaucratic imagination can feel remote and solemn. Jizō is the point of tenderness that invites ordinary people to intervene. Folk gods and local guardians complicate the map even further. In many villages, a local spirit performs the liminal role, a small shrine at the foot of a slope. Kami Sama to be more precise, who watches over thresholds and is propitiated when bodies pass. These are not important psychopomps, but rooted custodians, living religion's way of saying the community itself will hold the border. The result is that psychopompic function is distributed, sometimes absent, sometimes human, sometimes cosmic. Yet, practically, what does this look like at other sides? Well, a family gathers, incense is placed, a small chant may be said, the air is heavy with the ordinary, cooking smoke, a fan, a clock. If a shamanic rite is still performed, it resembles the older impulse, a ritual to disentangle attachment and keep the dead from clinging. If Buddhist rites are commissioned, a monk's voice will rhythmically recite sutras, moving the moment into the economy of merit and a karmic remedy. Either way, what matters in Japanese practice is doing the thing that answers the appropriate anxiety, washing where you fear pollution, chanting where you fear karmic weight, visiting stones where you fear abandonment. There is a subtle moral grammar to these options. The native Shintō frame teaches boundaries. Do not cross, do not touch, wash when you return. The Buddhist frame teaches accounts. Acts have consequences, and merit can be transferred or accrued on behalf of the departed. Popular practice, wonderfully pragmatic, mixes the two. You wash, you chant, you leave a toy, and you light a lantern at Obon. Each practice is a small human attempt to make a world that will otherwise be indifferent into one that is, at least partially, accountable. If you prefer the administrative clarity of a mailed invoice, you will find Enma's ledger comforting. Yet, if you prefer the private dignity of a quiet wash, you will prefer the slope. Japan gives you both, and then asks you, politely, to choose the small human action you will perform to make the journey bearable. And that combination, silence, ceremony, and compassionate object, is the Japanese answer to transit, an art of attending rather than an economy of sentencing. Court and Inhabitants, Izanami's brood, Thunder Kami, Enma's judges, and Jizō's rescue. In the Kojugi, Izanami does not simply die and vanish. Her body becomes generative of horror. From her flesh come thunder spirits, maggot-born attendants, and a brood of uncanny forces that make the subterranean a place not of law but of rods. These are not officials with badges and gavels, they are symptoms, the world's own corruption, given rather terrible life. You see, when you step inside that mythic house, you should feel the intimacy of decay, the electric sound of Thunder Kami, aka gods born not of blessing but of disintegration, and the absolute otherness of beings who are the remains of a wonderful goddess. The grotesque brood, as the native pictures beating heart, Izanami's children of rot are not designed to adjusticate. They are the landscape's answer to death's transgression. They nourish, they thunder, they echo the horror of a living thing, turned over into the economy of the dead. Now, Buddhism arrives from the continent and fills the emptiness. The silence is decorated with architecture, mapped hells, named torment, rolls of judgment chambers, where Izanami's brood suggested a world unmade. The Buddhist frame gives that world a plan. Jigoku, the hells, are categorized sometimes by heat and cold, sometimes by the precise sin, and its correspondingly precise correction. Enma, or Emma-o, which means king, is painted into existence as a stern magistrate. His court is stocked with registers and subordinate judges. In temple worlds he sits, sometimes fearsome, sometimes almost bureaucratically comic, with scrolls, hats, and scribes arrayed like clerks in a municipal office. The underworld becomes legible. Sin has a name, misdeed has a tariff. Popular prints and shrine paintings put the 10 kings on parade, each king responsible for a ledger, a section of hell, a narrow, awful speciality of punishments. That image of Enma, with his false register, is a modern audience's shorthand for cosmology that now wants to measure and account. The horror becomes administrative horror, painted judges, iron stern faces, lists of names. So that the afterlife looks less like a formless pit and more like a very bad court. This is a comfort of a kind. Where rot is chaotic, laws orderly, where chaos terrifies, order promises that everything will be calculated and proportionate. But then let the ledger dominate the human center of the story. Popular devotion gives the scene a counterweight in the shape of mercy. Enter Jizō, the small stone guardian with his pips and plastic toys, and his wider Buddhist analog, Chitikapa, the Bodhisattva, vowed to rescue beings from hell. Jizō is the low church of consolation, unthreatening, nimble, absurdly tender. Mothers tie red pips to his neck, leave tiny rice balls, place toy cars at his feet. Each small act is both play and practice. Jizō tends the most vulnerable, children, miscarried fetuses, souls who slipped away unaccustomed to the rules. In ritual grammar Japan, Jizō is the portable mercy you can buy with a ribbon and a small offering. He is the compassionate instrument ordinary people have to hand. Every depiction of Enma's cult must be cut against his human tenderness. So, functionally, these images do work. The mapped hells and painted judges serve moral pedagogy. They instruct, terrify, and discourage social harms by making punishment concrete and memorable. Jizō and the household altar do social repair. They give relatives an action to perform, a way to turn anxiety into discipline, grief into care. Household rites, memorial services, and the tying of little bibs are not superstitious add-ons, but practical devices that anchor social memory and check the production of Han, the grudging energies that can become restless ghosts if neglected. The brood of Izanami reminds us that some things are raw and unsystematic. The court reminds us that we crave order in the face of horror. Jizō reminds us that mercy is practiced more than decreed. Japanese afterlife, in its layered imagination, allows for monsters' origin, bureaucratic accounting, and ordinary compassion to sit uneasily but purposefully together. It is a story that moves from the electrical terror of rot to the cool uncertainty of registers, and finally to a roadside kindness, a beep, a toy, a small light left to flicker for a soul he cannot fully name. Judgment, reward, and cultural function, Shintō impurity meets Buddhist karma, rites, purification, and popular rescue. You see, some underworlds sell their secrets with gates, ledgers, or ferrymen. Japan's begins with a slope, ordinary, small, and finally absolute, and ends, if you listen carefully, with water, chant, and the work of neighbors. In the native frame, Yomi teaches the same hard lesson again and again. Death is not primarily a verdict to be argued, but a stain to be managed. The world's answer is ritual, hygiene, rather than legal wrath. When Buddhism arrives, it adds a language of karma and courts. Popular practice stitches the two together with temple rites, Jizō, compassion, and ceremonies that turn metaphysical anxiety into domestic action. At the heart of the Shintō teaching is kegare, contamination. Contact with death leaves a tag on the household that cannot be wiped away by sentiment alone. Izanagi's first gesture after he flees Yomi is not vengeance, but washing, misogi, the full-body immersion that unbinds the stain. That humble image of a man scrubbing himself clean off what he has seen tells you everything practical about Japan's afterlife culture. Cleansing is not a decorative ritual, it is a civic technology. You wash because to remain unwashed is to threaten kin, property, and ritual order. The ritual is both theological and bureaucratic in effect. It restores the person to the living social economy. Buddhism overlays this domestic hygiene with an economy of consequence. The Jigoku, or hell, cosmography supplies names for, well, hells, charge for torments, and a procedural imagination in which Enma or King Enma reads records and the 10 kings divide judgment between them, where Shintō gives us a slope and a sealed stone. Buddhist iconography gives us courts, registers, and measured punishments. Together, the two frames allow ordinary people to answer two anxieties at once: the fear that death will contaminate the living, and the fear that tomorrow debts will go unpaid. Misogi answers the first, sutra chanting and merit transfer the second. That is why popular practice so often looks like a bundle of different acts. A family may perform misogi and harae to purify the house. They may invite monks to recite sutras, to accrue and dedicate merit. They may set up a household altar to make regular offerings, and they may visit a roadside Jizō to leave a bib for a lost child. Each act answers a distinct worry. Will my household be safe? Will my ancestor find a favorable rebirth? Will that miscarried infant have a companion at the margin? The rituals are pragmatic, not merely doctrinal. They are techniques for social repair. Open is the ritual idiom in which this layer theology becomes public theater. Lanterns float because we prefer our ancestors' return to be visible and bounded. Bomb dances gather a town to reinscribe kinship with movement and food. Temples fill with sutra sound as households feed ancestral list into the clerical memory. The festival's choreography, lights, rites, procession, is a civic contract between the living and the dead. We will remember, we will provide, and we will keep the boundaries tidy. The floating lantern is not merely picturesque. It is the civic reply to the slope's private secrecy. And then there's Jizō, humble, portable salvation. While Enma's register can terrify with its magnitudes, Jizō offers ordinary people an instrument of compassion they can wield with a ribbon and a tiny rice ball and a plastic toy. Mothers tie bibs, leave toys, mutter names. The stone figures accumulate that tenderness like small, practical petitions. In the popular imagery, Jizō care is not a theological loophole so much as a social technology. It channels grief into a stabilizing practice and draws communities together in a small act of mercy. Functionally, all these rites do three things at once. First, they manage grief. Ritual gives structure to loss, a script for what people must do, and a language that the bereaved can use to act rather than to despair. Second, they maintain social hygiene. Purification rites and funerary protocols protect households and neighbors from the anxieties bound up with death. Third, they teach and discipline. Painted hells, temple morals of Enma, and popular story make more outcomes with it. So behavior is shaped not only by law or conscience, but by cultural pedagogy. The moral grammar here is gently pragmatic. If you want to keep the household safe, you perform the purification. If you want to influence fate beyond this life, you commission sutras and make offerings to accrue merit. If you want to comfort a mother or lost a beloved child, you tie a bib on Jizō and make a small human pledge to remember. None of these acts contradict the others. They sit in parallel. Japanese practice does not demand a single metaphysical account. It offers a portfolio of remedies turned to different human needs.